Hi, everyone. It's Beth Davis here, and we're going to go ahead and start the Southern Piedmont Chapter meeting of the North Carolina Native Plant Society for February. And welcome. We're so glad you've joined us on this rainy, cold February day, but we all know spring's right around the corner. So I am the co-chair, as I said, of the Southern Piedmont Chapter along with Lisa Tompkins. And we are grateful to Amy Tipton and the staff of the UNC Charlotte Botanical Garden for co-hosting this event with us today.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's always a joy to collaborate with the Native Plant Society and you and the Southern Piedmont Chapter. So you'll see on the left, we have lots of upcoming native plant studies classes, including an aquatic and wetland plants class for identification, a native birds class, spring wildflower ID, and so forth. And all of our classes offered within the native plant studies can be used to fulfill a certification program, our CNPS program, and there's more information on that and links to register for each of the classes on our website, which I've placed in the chat as well. And then since all of you are native plant enthusiasts, I wanted to encourage you to place in your calendar the spring plant sale. It's a very popular event, and even COVID can't keep us away. So we're doing online sales and curbside pickup for the spring, and many of our selections are native, but we do offer some other things as well. And we are going to be opening up ordering for our gardens members at the end of March, and then for our members members end of March, non-members beginning of April. So please check that out. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about a special group of plants. Beth asked me to do something related to Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. So I would like to introduce you to a genus of plants called Hexastylus. That's the formal scientific genus name. And colloquially, they're known as heartleaf ginger. Some of them are also called little brown jugs, depending on the species. And these are plants that are very unique in lots of different ways. They are in the birthwort family, Aristolochiaceae, and that name is stemmed from the Greek, I believe, words which mean best and birth, because plants in this family were used to ease birth pain during childbirth, of course. And we have several species in that family and in this particular genus within our North Carolina native flora. So I'm going to concentrate a little bit on Hexastylus, but I did want to mention that this is a sister group to our wild ginger, our Canadian ginger, the Asarum canadense. So the Hexastylus is named so regarding the scientific name because it has 6 styles, and styles are the organs that hold up the stigma of the plant. So it's part of the female reproductive system of the plant, which you see there at the far right. The stamens are around the edges at the bottom, and then the inner whorl is the female part. And you can see them also in the image, the larger image of the entire flower to the right. And one of the interesting things about this group of plants is that their flowers are born typically underneath of the leaves, and only when you pull away the leaves can you really properly appreciate these beautiful flowers. Most all of them range in color from green to a deep burgundy, and most all of them have heart-shaped leaves. So here you see the heartleaf ginger species that is called Shuttleworthii or Shuttleworth's heartleaf. And it has relatively large flowers. Because the flowers are born underneath of the leaves on the ground, they have unusual pollinators. A lot of ground living insects are pollinators for this plant. And then, like many of our native spring wildflowers, the seeds to this plant are or have a little fatty appendage that's called an elaiosome that is very attractive to ants. And ants gather these seeds in their colonies, and often you'll see the spring plants the next year germinating in tight clusters because they are former ant colony areas. And in the next slide, we'll see another very common genus or a species within this genus. Laurie, if you don't mind to advance this. This is the little brown jug. And you'll notice that little brown jug has a longer leaf. It's sometimes called arrowleaf ginger. And the flowers are actually absent of petals. All of the structure you see here is part of the sepal. And so all of these have 3 sepals, and in little brown jugs, the sepals are fairly reduced. And there are 11 species of Hexastylus within the southeast of the United States. And in North Carolina, we have 10 of those. So it's a really intriguing group of plants, a lot of variety in leaf shape and variegation. And one other thing I wanted to mention, you can tell the difference between the asarum or the wild ginger from the Hexastylus or the heartleaf, because heartleaf is evergreen and it is not furry. And the wild ginger it dies back in the winter months, and it has a very furry white pubescence on the leaves. So that's your little tidbit for this month.
Thank you, Amy. We look forward to more classes and diving deeper into native plants at the certificate program classes that you have over at UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens. And so that little taste was just enough to make us go sign up for more classes, I'm sure. So thank you. So for today's meeting, as we said, we are so grateful to have Laurie Dukes, the Charlotte City arborist, to talk to us about caring for our trees, and really as a follow-up from picking our trees back in January with Dr. Mellichamp, and looking forward to spring when we're all going to be out there digging holes and planting trees. So we are grateful to have Laurie with us today. She is responsible within the city of Charlotte for administering the neighborhood tree planting program and also enforcing the city's tree ordinance as it relates to the right-of-way trees. She holds a BS and MS in entomology and is an ISA certified arborist and holds a track qualification as well. So Laurie, welcome, and we are so glad to get to know you. Thank you.
Oh, well, great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here to follow up from last month's meeting. I thought Dr. M's presentation was wonderful, and it always gets me interested in thinking about other trees that the city could be planting in the right of way. So just as a follow-up to that, just talking about how you can give your trees a long and happy life. So starting from, installing the tree, choosing the tree, and all the way up to when you have a tree in your yard, how do you care for it? What are things that you should look for to make sure your tree stays healthy and long-lived? So, I think we all know the benefits of trees. Y'all are members of the Native Plant Society. Obviously, you love plants. Hopefully you love trees too, like I do. But some of the things that I always like to talk about is why trees are great. They clean the air. They're taking out carbon dioxide. They're giving off oxygen. They're sequestering carbon. They reduce the amount of water that's being run off. They intercept rain on their leaves, so it slows the rain coming down, which we've had a lot of lately, right? So if you live in an area with trees, hopefully you've seen a little bit of that, where we're not getting as much erosion and runoff. And of course, having trees in a parking lot is a great thing. I know when I go to shopping areas, I always look for the trees to park underneath in the summertime. So my car is in a gazillion degrees when I come out, when I go places. Um, Wildlife, for me, that's always a big thing. So I am an entomologist by education. So I love the bugs, I love the spiders and all sorts of things, arthropods. But other than that, barred owls, we have a ton of barred owls around Charlotte. And other wildlife, the deer, which can be kind of okay. I have a lot in my yard. But all the acorns and stuff, definitely give them food as well. And for me, living here in Charlotte, the trees are what makes Charlotte Charlotte to me. It makes our city, I think, unique. And I hear that from people that come to visit all the time. They talk about how many trees we have and how much green there is. So I feel like that's something that makes Charlotte Charlotte. There's been a lot of different researchers out there looking at the benefits of trees, other than the ecological things, the good stuff we know about. But some of the stuff that means in our pocket, in our wallet, those trees that give us shades around our buildings, around our houses, we have reduced costs for energy. So you're saving money on energy. So, during the summertime, it gives you cool. So you're not having to run your air conditioning as much. It also adds a lot to curb appeal. So lots of research looking at how houses with mature trees and mature landscaping, not just trees, but plants and flowers and everything, the houses sell quicker and they have a higher resale value as well. Same thing with businesses. People tend to like to shop around business areas that have vegetation around them, trees and different plants as well. Lots of research, Green Cities, Good Health. There's a really cool website to look at that. They have a lot of research looking into that trees, that even looking outside at green spaces give you a feeling of calm. It reduces your anxiety. It reduces your heart rate. There's been studies looking at people in the hospital. They have a quicker recovery time when they're able to look at green spaces. So it has a lot of not really tangible values as well. In areas where there is more trees planted, there's a lower crime rate. So lots of really good things to do with trees. Again, I know you guys know a lot of this stuff, but I always like to start with that. So some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, talk about tree selection. Dr. M covered a lot of very specific individual trees to look at for selection. I'm going to cover something a little bit more broad. Tree planting. How do you do it? How do you plant a tree? And then after that tree's in the ground, how can you care for those trees? How can you protect those trees? I did mention earlier, or was mentioned rather, that if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I also let Beth and Amy know that if there's questions that I need to answer during, I love having conversations with people. Having in-person presentations, I think, is good for that, to be able to do that. It's a little different on a Zoom type presentation, but if there's something I can answer in between these different topics, I'd feel free to take these questions as well. So tree selection. So when I like to think about trees, putting trees in your garden, putting trees in your yard, I always like to think of the big picture. Why do you want to put those trees out there? Are you looking to plant a tree for wildlife, either for a tree for food for wildlife or a tree that's going to provide shelter? That's always something to think of as well. If you're like me and you like pollinators, you might want to consider planting trees or plants that have flowers for pollinators to come by. A lot of the research shows that you want to have an abundance of plants that have flowering, and also plant things that are going to flower at different times during the year, so you have that good diversity to bring in those different types of animals throughout there. Screening, you might have something near your house that you'd prefer not to see all the time. So you might want to think about an evergreen plant to put up a screen of different trees or shrubs. That way you don't have to see whatever's behind you or next to you that you don't like to see. And then aesthetics, sometimes it's as simple as you just would like something in your yard. Something like a Japanese maple that gives you that nice structure and that nice leaf color. A couple years ago, I planted a witch hazel in my front yard. And it's always so much fun for me to see those little confetti-like flowers coming out early in the year and, just kind of giving me that different look during the different times of year. So thinking about those trees or those plants, think about, what role do you want to play in the garden? always you need to think about the overall size of that tree. What is it going to be at 40, 50 years down the road? It might be great to put that little oak tree that's 8 feet tall in front of your house, but 20, 30 years down the line, it might be a little bit too big for that space. So always look at your horizontal space that you have and then your vertical. Really important that you avoid conflicts. So anything underground or overhead utilities is really important that you're thinking about that as well. In my neighborhood, our backyard is where our power lines are. And so I can't have large maturing trees at the very back of my house. So I planted some smaller dogwoods back there to give me a little bit of trees in the back that gives me a little bit of screening from my neighbor's fence, but also, gives me nice flowers. And it's always going to stay small where the electric utility isn't going to have to come through and reduce the height of my tree. So really definitely important to think about that. Also look at any sidewalks or driveways or locations of stop signs or street lights or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're planting something near those conflicts that, you don't want to put a big oak tree next to a light because eventually it's going to shade it out for a period of time until you can get up and over that light. So maybe think of something a little bit smaller. Also in reference to your house, tree roots go really, really far. 2.5 times the height of the tree, those tree roots can spread out. So you don't want to put a tree right next to the foundation of your house. If you have a crawl space, it's going to go underneath your foundation. It's looking for water, it's looking for oxygen in that root and that soil, and it's looking for nutrients. So those trees are going to look for those things to be able to get through. And also look around at the other trees you might have. Don't try to overspace. This picture was taken by one of my coworkers. This was in the right of way because that's where I work. So we do tree planting between the street and the sidewalk in the city of Charlotte. But he came across this house and they had all these mimosa trees being planted here. And they were, these sidewalk panels are probably 5 feet wide. So, they're 4.5, 5 feet apart. So A, an invasive species, something we definitely don't want to have, and B, much, much too close to be inside there. So, be mindful about what you're planting. If there's a lot of shade in the area, make sure you're planting a tree that is going to be shade tolerant for a period of time. If you've got trees that are starting to age out and you think are going to be removed in the next 5, 10 years, maybe you could plant something a little less tolerant, but it really would be better to plant something that's more shade tolerant. Again, I mentioned about planting next to sidewalks. If, again, I work in the right of way, so that's where all my pictures are taken. But these are maple trees that were planted in too small of a planting area next to the sidewalks. And as they're growing, these red maples, their roots tend to be at the surface anyway. And so they're lifting this sidewalk right here. So, be mindful of where you're putting trees in reference to other structures. Same thing, this walkway is being lifted. You can see over here, this driveway is being lifted as well. If you're planting near a wall, it might lift that wall or cause damage to that wall. So just be mindful about what's around you. I mentioned earlier about, looking overhead, looking for the overhead power. It's really important. Our electric utilities, they're charged to, and that's kind of a pun, sorry about that. I'm kind of a punny person, so forgive me. But they are, charged to provide power. And so they are going to make sure that their wires are going to be free of any kind of vegetation that might land on the wire or land on that transformer and cause an outage. So these pictures here are some utility pruning that is actually acceptable by the International Society of Arboriculture. So, it doesn't make the trees look good. I'm not at all saying that it's aesthetically pleasing at all, but it is something that they have to do to be able to provide power to us. So this is an example of a very large oak tree that is underneath a power line. It has been pruned for years and years, coming back to give that U shape, that V shape, to be able to go around that power line right there. And so, it's consistently cut back over a period of time. So you don't want to set yourself up for having a tree that isn't able to grow to its best potential. Again, putting it too close to lights or under power lines, and by other structures. Now, I don't think this sugarberry was planted. I think this was probably a bird planted tree, but, making sure, being mindful about how large the tree is going to grow in height, but also in diameter as well. It's kind of eating this fence right here. So we want to make sure we're not setting that tree up that we're going to have issues long term. And again, making sure that you're putting something that is in scale for the house as well. This big, this maybe a Natchez crepe myrtle might be a little bit too big to be planted right up next to the foundation of that house right there. Something we always talk about as arborists is planting the right species in the right place. I talked a little bit about under power lines, near structures, near other trees. But you also want to get a tree that's, the right one for the environment. You don't want to put a tree that's adapted to a really sandy soil in a really heavy clay soil. Also a tree that's more adapted to the Northeast where it's colder. We don't want to put that here in Charlotte. We're getting pretty warm. I think we're 7B right now is our planting zone. So having a tree that's better adapted for a 5 zone, you really wouldn't do so well here long term. Again, the soil type, really be mindful of that. The water, if you've got a spot that stays wet all the time, you don't want to put a tree that likes dry feet. If anyone likes screening with Leland cypress, they're not my favorite, but they do what they need to do. Leland cypress do not like having wet feet. They will up and die really quickly after being in the water for a long period of time. Some trees also can get infection by root rot diseases for being in the water too long. So it does affect their root system. And making sure that planting space is proper. You have enough ground space to be able to manage for that tree. If you're not familiar with, there's a lot of different non-native, invasive and exotic species, whether it's insects, plants, pathogens. Thisinvasive.org is a really great website if you want to learn more about different things that may be affecting trees that could potentially come to Charlotte. So this pretty little guy is the spotted lanternfly. If you haven't heard of that, that's in Pennsylvania and a couple other states. That's affecting a wide variety of plants. Emerald ash borers here in Charlotte killing ash trees. So we don't want to plant more ash trees in our environment knowing that it's going to be impacted by this insect. But if you ever have, want to learn more about invasives, I always like to kind of direct people to this website. So I'll get on my invasives soapbox real quick, and then I'll jump off. But Bradford pears, if you have these in your yard, definitely consider removing these trees. Bradfords were kind of all the rage in the 80s and were planted all over in the right-of-way in Charlotte. But it's definitely something that we are working to try and remove. Unfortunately, the Bradford pears, they are supposed to be sterile, but their fruit, or their flowers rather, can be fertilized by other species of pears that may be around, and it actually makes a fertile fruit. And when that fruit gets out in the natural area, the birds and other animals eat it, get it out in the natural area, it grows into back to its native calorie pear form, and they have very stout thorns on their stems, those new ones that are growing out in the environment. So all these right here, definitely something we don't want to get out into our natural areas, definitely something we need to control. So if you have Bradfords, you probably know they're prone to splitting. They fall apart in storms. So this was a picture actually taken in my neighborhood. There was a failure. So these branches tend to grow really close to each other. And so they make kind of like this little V shape. And what happens is as the branches get heavy down with weight and water and rain, they just kind of peel off like a banana, is always what I say. And so we had a breakage in this tree. This was the 2018 when we had those 2 hurricanes back to back. So breakage occurred in one hurricane, and a couple weeks later, this other branch fell out right there. So they just kind of peel. So if you have Bradfords, consider removing them and replace them with a native tree. We have lots of native trees. If you want that white flower that the Bradfords have, if you want the red foliage in the fall like the Bradford have, there are a lot of replacement trees that can meet those needs. So okay, that was really quick with tree selection, but I thought Dr. M did a great job giving specific tree examples that would do well here in Charlotte. Do you want me to take any questions now or continue on?
Laurie, Amy
Yeah.
had a question about
Sure.
a bounty program on Bradford pears. Is
Yes.
Charlotte doing that?
No, but I will say at my office, we have a cooperative Bradford pear program, but it's more just for the trees in the right of way. So because we just have thousands of Bradfords planted out in the right of way, what we've done either with neighborhoods or individual property owners is if the property owner will remove the tree, the city of Charlotte will come back and plant the tree. So we've done that with 3 different neighborhoods in the past. Actually, last year we did it with a neighborhood not too far from the Whitewater Center. And so they worked, their HOA worked, they had an arborist come out, they removed the Bradfords, they ground the trees, and that neighborhood just got replanted with about 26 trees in the right of way. So that is a program that we do. If you haven't heard about the Bradford Pear Bounty Program, it's in South Carolina. Clemson University Extension is doing it in cooperation with Duke Energy, and I can't remember the other group right now, but they're doing it in the city of Clemson and also in Sumter this year. But that's a great question.
So when you were working with the neighborhood, what kind of trees, for example, are you planting in place of Bradford pears?
Yeah, so we worked with the neighborhood, and so we had to deal with the size of the planting strip that they had. So the smaller the width of the planting strip, we have to go with small maturing trees. We were lucky in that neighborhood; they had 8 feet and greater planting strips on one side of the street, and the other side of the street didn't have any planting strips in the right of way. So we planted some tulip poplars, and then we also planted silver bells as well out there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I really like the silver bells that we've been able to plant out there. So, our goal with our neighborhood planting program is we try to get as large of a tree as possible, given the space that we have. So if we have a small grass strip between the street and the sidewalk, we're going to put small maturing trees in there. The bigger we can get larger trees, as long as we don't have any overhead power or any existing trees that that would shade that out.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, sure. All right, so tree planting. So this is kind of more of like, how do I do it? How do I get that tree that I have into the ground? So this is a great time of year to plant trees. So October through March, I tend to start in November. It's still pretty warm in October, but usually November through March is when I'm doing tree planting for the city of Charlotte. And that's a really good time because depending on what you're planting, so some trees like oak trees, the nurseries don't want to dig them until they're dormant. And so, we want to make sure it's the right time for the tree that's being dug and being put in the ground. You don't want to put a tree in the ground in July when it's super duper hot and not a ton of rain. It's really stressful. That tree is gone. If it's a field grown tree, it's gone from an environment of having its fruits being spread out really far to having its roots dug and put somewhere else in the ground. So once that tree is dug from the ground, it definitely takes a good 1.5 years, maybe even 2 years for it to kind of recover from that root shock to be able to start growing new roots and get adapted to that environment. So really getting planted in the wintertime when we're having some rain and get some water to those new tree roots to help that tree recover as quickly as possible is really the best time of year to do it. And there's a couple different types of plants you can buy. You can get bare root, which is exactly what it sounds like. There's no soil or any potting media attached to it. It's just grown, and then it's just the bare roots that you can put inside the ground. Containerized, which is going to be a pot like what you buy from Lowe's or Home Depot or from a garden center. Or you can get a ball and burlap tree, which is a tree that's a field-grown tree, and then it's dug with a very large spade wrapped in a burlap sack, and then wire is put around it, a basket is put around it, so it's easier to transport and it keeps that soil together around that root structure. So when you're looking for trees, if you're at a nursery or you're going to a center that has field-grown trees, you definitely want to look at the tree and look for any damage on that surface. So this crepe myrtle over here on the left-hand side, this was where an old bamboo cane, the tree had started growing around it. So the nursery had bamboo attached to keep that tree nice and straight and keep it staked up. But unfortunately, it was left on too long and the tree started growing over. And so we have this defect right here in the tree. So that's a tree you probably don't want to put into your yard. This particular tree was planted, and the tree on the right, and I think the damage came from when it was being planted, either the machinery or someone nicked it. But the entire bark and all the cambium is knocked off. It's getting down into that old wood tissue. That's a tree. This is always going to be there. That tree is young and it's probably going to grow over that. But that's always going to be a defect in an area that would be prone to breakage long term. When we're looking at trees, we also want to make sure that you don't want a tree with what we call codominant stem. So these stems are about the same diameter, and so they're competing with each other for dominance. Who is going to be the center leader of that tree? Those two are going to compete. If they're about the same width, they're about the same size. And so what that can lead long term is you get a tree that has these stems that are about the same width. And there was one right here that broke out. So very similar to our Bradford pears. So when we're looking at these trees, if you have two stems about the same width, you can just remove one. Or if you're worried about the size that's going to be resulting in that wound right there, you can subordinate it, so reduce the height on it. And what that's going to do is allow that stem that you're keeping to kind of be the leader, be the one that's at the top and taking charge. And the energy is going to go to that one as opposed to the competing one. So you definitely want to try to do that early, or just don't buy that tree that has that codominant stem. So this is an example of a nursery that tried to take out that codominant stem right there. It looks a little weird. It looks a little kind of not the best looking form, right? Usually we look for a single straight central leader for a lot of trees. This one's a little bit better. It's not as a strong of a U on the side right there. And honestly, this is probably about 10 feet up. That tree over time, assuming it's going to be a large maturing tree, as it grows in diameter, you're not going to notice that weird little bend over a period of time. So either don't purchase that tree or try to correct that before you actually put it into the ground. Definitely before you plant a tree, call 811. They will send all the different utilities out to mark what's there. You definitely don't want to get out and hit your cable line, hit your Google Fiber line, or your water line or your gas line. So definitely before you put that shovel on the ground, call 811 just to make sure that you know what's out there before you start digging. So once you have the tree species that you have, it's the right one for the site. You went to your nursery, you picked it out. This is the tree you want. You've got your utilities marked. It can take a couple weeks for the utilities to get out. So definitely consider doing that kind of on the earlier side of things. And then what you need to do is you need to put it in the ground. So when we plant trees, we want to build or dig a hole that is 2 to 3 times wider than that root ball. So 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball, but about the same or a little bit shallower depth than the height of that root ball. So really important, we don't want to plant our trees too deep. Those roots, they are seeking oxygen, water, and nutrients. Oxygen is a really limiting factor for tree roots. So if there isn't oxygen in the soil, those tree roots aren't going to be able to live. If there's too much soil on top of those roots, that tree is going to want to live. It's going to put new roots out above where that low oxygen level is. But those new roots that are growing from the trunk are not as structurally stable as the roots that were originally there. So 2 to 3 times wider, a little bit less depth than what that root ball height is. And so you want to leave that open to be able to get that in. So this is a picture that I took at a construction site when I used to do tree inspections at construction sites. They literally took the plant out of the pot and stuck it on the gravel and put mulch around it and said it was planted and ready for me to inspect. So make sure it actually goes into the ground. Really important. I used to work for the state of South Carolina, and we would diagnose issues for trees. We went to someone's house that had a row of Leland cypress, and the people that planted it, they left it in the B&B. They didn't take it out of the container. They just stuck it on top of the dirt and piled up soil around it and said it was planted. So you need to physically get that tree into the ground. If you're planting a containerized plant, obviously first step, take it out of that, after you dig your hole, you can see in the background, we've got a hole in the back right there. Take it out of the container. The next thing you want to do is you want to break up that root ball. A lot of times with containerized trees or shrubs as well. I do this the same method with any kind of shrubs that I plant in my garden, and really actually everything I plant in my garden. But I break up that root ball. So you want to take it apart. You want to try to get as much of that potting media out away from those roots. A lot of time there's a lot of perlite, there's a lot of bark mulch, not a lot of soil, if you will, inside that potting soil. Um, you want to make sure to try to get as much of that off there. Sometimes that potting media, if it gets really dry, it actually starts repelling water. And so we want to make sure that we don't put anything inside with those roots that isn't going to allow that root mass to be able to get some water. Um, and a lot of times what I do is I completely bare root my trees and my plants when I put them in the ground. So what that's going to do is that's going to allow you to look for any of these circling roots that this tree might have. Sometimes if it's grown in a pot for too long, those roots are just going to trace the outside of that pot and start growing in a circle. If it gets too close to the stem of the plant, it can girdle, it can kind of choke off that plant right there. Or as the roots kind of grow next to each other, they can cut each other off as well. So when you take off all that planting media, you can inspect it to make sure that you don't have any girdling or circling roots on that plant. Even for larger diameter trees, you can do this as well. You can wash all the soil off of it. This was a picture taken by Dr. Linda Chucker Scott out in University of Washington. If you're not familiar with her, she has an amazing garden professor's blog. Lots of really good research, scientific-based information about trees and plants. So I would suggest have some time, but get lost on that website. It's some really good information out there. But go ahead and get that soil off, cut off any girdling and circling roots. They're not going to straighten themselves out in the ground. The tree is not going to be able to straighten that root structure out by itself. So go ahead and get that before you put the tree in the ground or the shrub in the ground. I planted, I think, about 9 viburnums in front of my house a couple years ago. And I did this with all of them. My husband came out and he was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Why are you cutting the roots on this?" I was like, "Don't worry, it's okay. It's okay. Just give them a minute. Let me do this." And it took them a little bit of time to recover. They kind of sat. They didn't do a whole lot of growing that first year, but now they're doing really great. So, just definitely something to think about. This is also a picture from this garden professor's blog. So this was a participant posted this and saying, this tree blew over, and once the dirt was off of it, she saw that these circling roots were there. And you can just see the roots are not going to correct themselves. They're just going to continue to grow in the same pattern. And once they get against the stem of the tree, they're going to go ahead and cut that off for nutrients. And the same thing with the roots as well. So this particular plant was just kind of a disaster. So the sooner you can do it before you get in the ground, it's really better long term. This is a black gum at one of the construction sites that I was inspecting. This was several years ago, and I eventually I did reject this tree. I didn't accept it because you can see these roots right up against the base of the tree, and that tree may have lived 5-10 years. But long term, that's not going to be a sustainable tree. This was a tree that was taken by a resident in Charlotte. He called me. Thank goodness this city maintained maple tree. It fell just next to his house. This is the edge of his house right over here on the right-hand side. It just missed his structure. But when I started looking at the pictures, you can see this two huge girdling roots going across this tree right here. And this is definitely what led to the demise of this tree, that there wasn't any more structural roots to be able to hold this tree up, and all that weight in the top, that tree just came over. So thankful that it fell how it did, and there was no, damage to people or property as well. So like I said, this is a pretty large diameter tree right here. It's been in the ground for a really long time, but you don't want to set yourselves up for problems. So when you're planting these trees, you want to make sure your very top root, so the root flare, so where it goes from the trunk being straight and it starts kind of growing out and getting wider, that's our root flare. You want to try to get that at or just a little bit above the grade. So you want to dig off all that dirt that may be on top of that uppermost root flare. So this is my hand. This is about 8 inches across from the top of my thumb down to my pinky. And so this particular tree just had way too much dirt piled up on it. Again, those roots need oxygen. If you put any more than 3 to 4 inches of any kind of fill on top of a root, it could limit the amount of oxygen getting to that root. So you want to try to make sure you find that root flare, make sure that's at grade or just a little bit above grade right there. So once you get that tree into the ground, if you're doing B&B or if you're high, obviously you might have a contractor, they're pretty heavy. I don't know if most people are able to move this, but make sure that that burlap comes off, especially if it's synthetic. The synthetic burlap is not going to break down. The natural burlap will break down over a period of time, but the more that you can get off of it, the more the roots can start to spread out, get into the native soil and start growing. Want to make sure that you remove any straps. These are kind of like a seatbelt kind of material, and they're not going to break down. They're synthetic. You also want to remove, I would say, at least the upper half of that basket to be able to let those roots get out into that native soil area. The more you can remove, the better. So this was a site that we were inspecting. My coworker was inspecting, and the contractor planted it and said, "Okay, it's ready for inspection." Well, they hadn't removed any of the burlap on top of that tree, so they had to dig it back out and then take it back off again. So you want to make sure you do that, take that off. Again, remove any of that strapping, all of that burlap. That's basically going to act as a pot. That tree, those new tree roots are going to get stuck inside that burlap until it breaks down and they can break out. So you want to give your tree the best start that you can. So after you found your root flare, you've got your hole the right width, your tree's there, it's nice and straight. Once you get that tree in the ground, you want to add a little bit of that native soil, and you kind of want to moderately firm it. You don't want to compact it so much, because those roots, you want them to be able to break out and to get into that growing area. So just compact it a little bit. That way the tree is stable and it's not going to sway. You can water a little bit, try to get rid of some air pockets, put some more root on there, firm it down just a little bit just to make sure it's good and stable. And you want to water that tree in. After that's done, you're going to have excess soil. So what you can do with that excess soil is you can add a short berm, like a 2 inches, just around the outside of the root ball of that tree. And what that's going to do is it's just a couple inches of soil. When it rains, that's going to direct the water to go towards the root ball where that tree is. So it's going to kind of make this collection area for that water to be able to go to that root area. And after a year or two, that 2 inches, it's going to be flat and you're not even going to notice it anymore. So you've got your tree in. It's nice, it's straight, you put your soil in, you've watered it. The next step you want to do is you want to add mulch. Mulch has a lot of really good things for it. Aesthetically, I think it's pleasing. I like having that ring of mulch around the tree. You don't want to make it any more than 4 inches, okay? So 2 to 4 inches deep around the tree, and I'll go in a little bit more detail exactly how to do it. You definitely do not want to allow it to be in contact with that trunk. So what I'll do is I'll put my mulch on, and then I go inside to the trunk of the tree and I just pull it back several inches, 2 to 3 inches away. So I have this open dirt area right next to the trunk of the tree. That mulch sitting next to the tree is going to hold water, which is great because we want it there to be able to hold water for the roots. But what we don't want it to do is we don't want it to be in contact with the root and allow the bark to start breaking down, or to allow insects to want to be inside there where it's nice and moist, or to allow fungus to come in and start causing an impact to the tree. I love arborist chips. So most arborist companies around town, they have to dispose of those chips when they, are removing trees or pruning trees. So you can call most of the arborist companies and ask them to get onto their mulch list. It's free, but there's no guarantee of when you're going to get it. But usually it's a great product to use. I've probably had 3 different dumps at my house in the past 2 to 3 years. I use it in all my natural areas and around my plants. That mulch is going to eventually break down, put nutrients back in the soil. Like I said, it kind of helps that tree retain water. It also helps to regulate the temperature of the soil as well. Or you can get the double hammered mulch as well. Pine straw is fine. I tend to find it kind of slippery. I guess walking across it kind of slips across itself, and it's a little bit more acidic than the other. It blows away a little bit more frequently as well. But I love arborist chips, and it's free, so that's always a good thing too, in my opinion. More money to go to buy the plants. So when you are mulching the trees, some of the things that you'll see around town, different types of mulching techniques that are not always the best. One on the left is what I call the volcano mulch, where it's just like a mountain piled up against the trunk of the tree. Again, we talked about that. We don't want it to touch the trunk of that tree right there. What happens when we pile that mulch on top of the tree is that's just this is way too much. This is, probably about 8 to 10 inches of mulch right there on top of this tree. It's way too much. And what this tree has done is, because those roots need oxygen, the trunk has started growing root tissue out from the trunk. And so it's up there in that very upper layers of mulch, and not in the ground where it's structurally and stabilizing the tree. So you don't want to put this big old volcano mulch on the top. You also don't want to do like an eagle's nest. Okay. This is like a big, huge U. This is probably a good, 6 inches of mulch berm right there. You really don't need that much. Those are way, way too much mulch on these trees. What you want to do is you just want to do 2 to 4 inches, pull it out from the trunk of the tree, make it as wide as you can. Having this big old eagle's nest of mulch like we see in this bottom corner, huge, huge pile right there, you're wasting mulch. You don't need it. You're encouraging girdling roots in this area. You're encouraging this tree to put roots up in here, making it less structurally stable. Here, it's just nice and spaced out and just nice and flat. So, but the bigger the mulch area you can provide for that tree, the better. Number one, it's good for the tree. Number two, it keeps your lawnmower and your string trimmer away from the base of that tree as well. So another really good thing. So this is what I was telling you earlier about, putting that mulch and pulling it back. This might be a little bit too far pulling off of that. It could be, you could put mulch up a little bit closer to these roots right here. You just don't want it to be on top of that bark of the tree right there. But this is a really great planting. So you can see the root flare where it starts getting wider at the base of the tree. You start seeing these structural roots are, right at the surface, right at grade, or just a little bit higher. That's a really good plant right there. After the tree's been planted, you want to inspect it. If there's any dead limbs or broken branches, go ahead and prune those out. If you see it before you put it in the ground, you can go ahead and do it while it's on the ground. It's much easier than having to get a ladder and get up there. But at any time, you can remove any dead, diseased, broken branches. You do not need to cut back the tree to account for the amount of roots that's being lost. That's not a good practice. That's not good for the tree. So you just want to go ahead and just let that tree be there. Cut anything that's dead or broken. That's perfectly fine, but you don't need to cut back any other branches. So just once it's there, you want to take care of that tree. Watering is really important. Really, that first year, 2 years is probably the most critical time after that tree has been planted. You want to do it frequently. So you might want to do it every single week. During the summertime, if we're really dry, you might need to do it a couple times during the week. You want to do it more often when we're dry, kind of droughty type weather. I know that's hard to believe that we'll ever get there, the amount of rain that we've had for the last couple of weeks, but we all know the summer usually gets pretty dry. So, during the summertime, definitely pay attention. The best water gauge that you have is on your hand. All right. So very simple. There's a lot of good devices. Y'all may already have some, and that's great if you want to do that. But usually what I'll do is I'll stick my thumb or I'll stick my finger into the ground. I'll go down a couple inches. If it feels dry, I'll put more water. If it feels wet, I won't water my tree. So you just kind of keep an eye on your tree. So frequent watering, slow watering is really important with trees. You don't want to get out, crank your hose up really high and put all the water out and then walk away. It's a nice slow water is what you want to do. So I had a tree planted in the right of way near my house last year by the city. And what I do for my irrigation is I take a 5-gallon bucket, I put 4 holes inside of it, and then I fill it up with water. I put it on the outside of the berm and I just let it slowly drip inside that tree. And that's how I watered it all summer long. It's very low tech. It's very inexpensive. It's something that I already had at my house. It's not the most attractive. I'm not gonna lie. My husband's kind of like, does that bucket have to stay out there all the time? But it did the job that it needed to do. There are other irrigation devices, gator bags. There's this other, tree system that's right there. There's one called a tree diaper. Interesting name, but there you are. That you can put around the base of the tree and fill up with water. Really important for these, if you're using these little portable systems, paper wasps will sometimes get inside there and want to make their nests in there. So be careful with that. And you want to make sure that it's dripping the water. They have these little drip devices. So you want to make sure they're not clogged up, that the water's actually coming out. So, but like I said, the 5-gallon bucket method, it's kind of my favorite, low tech. Were there any questions that y'all would like me to address in regards to the tree planting?
Laurie,
Yeah.
so we have a couple. One
Sure.
is, can you tell us a little bit more about city ordinances for homeowners cutting trees, easements, replacements? There was a question about what is the responsibility? Is it to the homeowner and so forth?
Okay, great. No, thank you. Those are fantastic questions. So City of Charlotte, we do have a pretty strict ordinance. So any trees that are planted in the right of way, so that grass area between the street and the sidewalk, is protected by the tree ordinance. If you don't have a sidewalk, I don't have a sidewalk in front of my house, but I still have a right of way. In front of my house, I just have a valley curb. So it's just kind of like a sloping little curb. So from the back of the curb, it's 16 feet towards my house is the city right of way. So each street has a little bit different width for their right of way. Sometimes it depends on the speed of the street. So a road like Tyvola or something like that, the right of way is going to be really, really large, as opposed to my sleepy neighborhood street, it's going to be a little bit smaller. If you have questions about if a tree is in the right of way, you can call landscape management, which is where I work. And that number is 704-336-4262. 704-336-4262. And that's our main desk. And we can look up in our data management system and see if there's a tree in the right of way. You can also, if anyone uses Polaris 3G, our city's GIS database, you can look on there and you can see where your property line is, and you'll see the space between the street and your property line as well. So those trees that are in the right of way, they are protected by the tree ordinance. Homeowners, if they want to do any care for those trees, like pruning, they contact us at landscape management, and we will come out, we'll see what kind of work you need to do, and we can write you a permit. It's a free permit. We write it to the arborist who's going to be doing the work. We do require a certified arborist maintains our trees in the right of way. Or if you don't want to do it and you're just concerned about the tree, there might be some dead limbs, or you're worried that it's dead, you can call us and arborists will come out and inspect it and make any plans for maintenance that needs to be done for that tree. If you want to plant a tree in the right of way, you can, if you'd like to do it yourself, again, you just get a permit from us, and we'll talk about the species that you're interested in planting. We'll make sure that it's the correct species. Or you can call us and say, hey, I want the city to plant a tree in the right of way, which is what I did. So that's one of the programs that I manage. So we always are looking for places to plant trees. So you cannot prune a tree, remove a tree, attach things to a tree. There's a lot in our city ordinance about trees in the right of way and how they're protected. I hope I answered all that question.
Yes, and then another question, is there anything special that should be considered for planting sourwood?
Well, I mean, as far as like how to plant it, or?
I believe so.
Okay, not that I know of. I mean, there are some trees that are definitely more resistant to transplant. So I know sometimes dogwoods can be a little tricky, and I think sourwoods are another one that can be a little bit tricky. So I think I think silver bell is another one as well, that it's kind of been suggested to get a containerized of one of those instead of, I really honestly don't think there's nurseries that grow sourwood trees. I love sourwood trees. I would love to plant more of those out there for our pollinators, for aesthetics, lots of different reasons. But yeah, I mean, you may want to get one that's a containerized tree and just kind of baby it a little bit more, because there are some trees that do uh, resist transplant, I guess is probably the nicest way to say it. Sometimes they're just up and dying. You don't know exactly why.
Okay, and let's take one more question. There's a question about, do all the same recommendations apply to shrubs?
So as far as like the taking them out of the container, removing planting media, and removing girdling roots, yes, definitely. Like I mentioned, the viburnums that I planted in front of my house, that's what I did with them. The same thing I do with trees. So you definitely want to try to get them to be as structurally sound when you put them in the ground, so you don't have a long-term problem. Lantana, I planted lantana this past year as well, and it came in a container, and they were root bound. The roots were girdling around the stem, and I did the same thing. I cut some girdling roots. I straightened some roots out when I put them in the ground to try to get those roots nice and splayed out so they could get the best. And they did fantastic this year. I'm crossing my fingers they come back. The rest of my lantana has come back, so I'm crossing my fingers they're going to come back. But yeah, the same thing can be done for a large shrub. All right, I'll go ahead and move on to tree protection and care. And if there are more questions, if you guys want to email me, I'll have my email at the end. Or if I don't get to some, I can answer them offline as well. That's perfectly fine. So back to my soapbox. Tree topping. I hope everyone here knows how bad topping is for trees. There's a lot of weird misconceptions about the need for topping. I've heard some people tell me, well, my landscaper said I have to top my curtain myrtle every single year, or it won't be healthy. That's not true. We definitely do not want to top trees. So just a couple pictures. So what happens when you top a tree? So basically what that means is that we're indiscriminately just removing foliage at a point, not at any kind of structural point. So when we prune trees, what we want to do is you either want to prune back to where like a branch comes to the main stem and prune it there, or if there's like another branch coming off of that branch, prune it back to the main branch. If you just cut it straight in the middle, there's not any cells around that area to be able to grow over and to close that spot off. We also have along the stem of plants, the stem of these trees, we call them dormant buds. So they're buds that just are kind of hanging out, not doing anything. And so when you top a tree, that tree is going to want to live. It wants to put out foliage because that's how it's making its food. And so what it's going to do is it's going to promote sprouting, water sprouts, epicormic sprouts is what we call it. And they're just random. They're just there. They're not structurally attached to the tree as well as a normal branch would have been. So what happens is these little sprouts, they will get weighed down with water and ice, and they are more prone to breakage than another plant. It just promotes poor structure. This is a big oak tree. I think this is on Providence Road. And it broke my heart when I drove by it. So I'm not sure why the resident had the tree topped, or maybe they just wanted it pruned and the person who did the work didn't quite understand. But structurally now this tree, all the new branches that are growing out are going to be weak. And this is a very tall oak tree, so when those branches fall, it's a lot of weight coming down right there. It does not promote crepe myrtle blooming. That's the one thing that I've heard from different people, that they say, oh, my landscaper said it's going to make it bloom more profusely if I top it. So this is something that Laura Brewer, who used to work for the city of Charlotte, this is something she did. This was across the street from the government center uptown. Someone had topped a couple crepe myrtles. And so she just kind of took pictures throughout this one year. So one tree was topped, one tree was not. So this was in March. So in April, the end of April, hardly leafing out. And this was in July of the same year. So this tree that wasn't topped, completely blooming. This one just barely getting blooms out. This is the end of July. They're just not doing great. So it does not promote blooming. It inhibits it. It doesn't do a good thing. So we definitely do not want to top any trees at all. If you do need to do some pruning, some of the things that are suggested for pruning is if you have branches that are rubbing or crossing, that's a good branch to prune out. If your branches are just too close to each other, so there's not enough space for them, that's a good thing. Water sprouts, so, sprouts that are just kind of growing in the wrong spot, where we have branches that are narrow and growing close together, kind of like the Bradford pears. When you have branches that are growing in a V kind of pattern, they're more prone to break, as opposed to branches that are growing in a U. That's a stronger structural area right there. Any kind of branches that are growing down or growing at wrong angles. So there are trees, sometimes you do need to prune trees. Out in the forest, they're growing tight, they'll prune themselves out. But out in the forest, if a branch breaks and falls, there's not a whole lot that it's going to damage, as opposed to here in an urban environment, there definitely is a little bit more stakes for branches that break. I mentioned earlier, dead, disease, damaged branches, those are ones that consider pruning as well. So this is an example. This was on Tyvola several years ago. I was with my dad. I was like, Dad, pull over. I got to take this picture. So this large tree, and I think it was a maple. I'm going to have to think about that, because there was also a hickory in the yard too. It had a dead branch, and it had just come down and speared straight through that roof. So any kind of dead branches is definitely something to look for in your tree. Definitely something, if it's near a structure or near where people are, to definitely consider getting pruned out. Now, if you have a natural area where people don't frequent, there's no structures, people aren't going back there, it's not a bad thing. It'll provide home for wildlife, lots of insects, woodpeckers will get in there to eat any kind of insects that are in there. But when I think about trees in an urban environment, you always have to think about what they might impact, whether it's a house, a car, a person, a fence, utility line. Always think about that. If you have vines on your tree, definitely consider removing those as well. So they're very aggressive. They'll take up, water and nutrients from the soil. They'll cover the leaves on the tree, and so they block sunlight, reduce photosynthesis. They can actually weigh down that branch on the tree. So when we have ice, which hopefully we won't get this year, but when we have ice storms or lots and lots of water, it just weighs that branch down and makes that more susceptible to being broken in a storm. This is Chinese wisteria. This will grow up the trunk of the tree, and we're talking several inches in diameter that wisteria vine can get. So it can actually girdle the tree. So it actually slows down or can cut off the water and nutrient movement inside that tree. You can see here, this is just a huge growth on this tree and just covering this tree up. Same thing with English ivy. I know some people love how it looks growing across the ground. I know some people let it grow up the side of their houses, but we really don't want it to grow on our trees. It can be really super duper heavy and really block all that photosynthesis. So, think about getting those vines removed. Usually what I recommend is kind of like a 2-cut method. So cut where it's comfortable for you to cut. I'm not very tall, so I usually cut about 4.5 feet off the ground, just because that's my height. And then make a cut at the ground level as well. And so what you want to do is you want to create this clear space where these vines are disconnected. You want to make sure that you take away anything you've cut, especially with English ivy. If you just drop it on the ground, that's just going to keep growing right back there. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to stop this upper vine from trying to get roots or reconnecting. So you don't want to just sever it at the ground or, sever those right there and just leave it. You do want to kind of get this band of clear space right there, and get rid of anything that you cut off. Don't pull any vines from the tree, especially right after you cut it, and even after they die. You just want to leave them right there. You don't want to pull it down because you don't want to break that branch or break those stems. The vines, after you sever it, it's going to die up in the canopy. It's not going to look the prettiest, but it's eventually going to start falling down, and then it'll be much better for that tree. If you do have to do weed control, you want to pull it by hand. You don't want to use string trimmers. This picture was set up. This was from one of my coworkers. And this guy was not really running his string trimmer against the base of the tree. It was a setup right there. But mulch is a great weed barrier. Please don't use plastic or landscape cloth. That really isn't a great thing for trees. So just don't even put that out around your trees. Just do a little bit of manual effort to remove the weeds. So you want to avoid that mechanical damage, lawnmower damage very frequently around the base of the tree. If you're trying to, grow grass near your trees, give yourself a nice mulch ring around that tree to protect the base of that tree. This area of damage is now a weak point and more prone to breakage long term. If you do have to guy and stake your tree, we don't do it for a lot of our tree planting unless it's a really busy street and we're worried that all the traffic might make that tree unstable or the root ball's a little bit too small. But if you do use stakes, please definitely remove them. So you can see on these two trees right here, they've grown in. That tree is growing around that staking material, so it's just going to girdle and cut into that tree right there. If you put Christmas lights on your tree, please take them off. Don't leave them up. This is a crepe myrtle over the Roussan's shopping center. This was several years ago, though, so I'm not sure if it's still there. But you can see they grew into the tree right there. So, or tree grew around them. It's just trying to grow. So, if you do put on Christmas lights, please remove them every single year. This is a picture one of my coworkers took in Greece when he went to go visit. I'm not sure if this was a bike lock or around this tree, but the tree is completely grown into it. So the trees are going to try to live. They're going to try to grow around these things in order to live right there. So definitely don't want that. If you're doing any kind of construction, make sure you give your tree adequate protection. A lot of times people put up fencing to protect just the trunk of the tree, but really what we need to do is we need to protect the root zone of that tree. So the drip line, so where the leaves end all the way out to here is where we need to protect these trees to protect that root area. Same thing with piling dirt on top of trees. Just like I mentioned with the mulch, anything more than 4 inches is going to inhibit oxygen getting to those roots and is going to cause a problem for those trees. So really protect that root zone. The drip line where the ends of the branches are, you don't want to do any kind of work inside there if you can. Building too close to a house. This one broke my heart. They didn't try terribly hard because their tree protection fence was not big enough, but they put around this big fencing area and then they took it down and they put their dumpster resting up against the base of the tree. So this is compacting the soil, having this dumpster here and equipment driving back and forth to dump things inside there. So we want to try to protect our root zone. You don't want to dig too close to a tree. The closer you get to the trunk of the tree, you have larger structural roots that are holding that tree into the ground. As you get outside the drip line, the roots are finer. Those are kind of feeder roots taking up oxygen or taking up water and nutrients and stuff. But the closer you get to the trunk of the tree, the more larger structural roots you get. So again, don't do any kind of work inside that drip line. Another really good rule of thumb is for every inch of tree diameter, you need to stay a foot away from that trunk. So a 9-inch diameter tree, you need to stay 9 feet on each side of that tree. So, 18 feet and then the trunk space in the middle. So really big area you want to provide for structural stability. Sometimes things break. So this was a water main break near one of our city trees within the city of Charlotte. And, breaks happen. And so this tree did have to be removed. The repairs that they were doing, it was just way too close to this very large tree. And we were concerned with the stability of that tree. So this one always makes me sad. Trees and parking lots are not best friends. Trees and sidewalks can sometimes have issues too. If you are putting irrigation in your house, be mindful of those trees. So this was a irrigation that was being put in and they just trenched with a ditch witch right through all of these tree roots right next to the sidewalk. So the structural stability of the tree is what we're concerned with because we're really close to there. You can bore underneath the tree roots. Most of our tree roots are going to be in the upper 3 feet of soil. So, if you can bore 4 feet under, you're going to have less impact on that tree or no impact in some cases. Same thing with putting electricity if you want to uplight trees as well. Just be mindful about where you need to go to put that electricity underground. This particular tree, the residents wanted to widen their driveway. And so what they did was they hired someone with a kind of a stump grinder type machine to just grind the roots outside of that tree so they could add their driveway. This tree did have to be removed. There's just no structural support over here. Other things for you to look out for: if you have holes or hollows in your tree, you can take a rubber mallet and you can hit that against the base of the tree to listen to different tones. A tree that has a hollow spot will kind of sound like a bongo as opposed to like a really tight drum. So you can just do that with a mallet. This particular tree had a pretty good hollow, and this seam that's going up right there, so this hollow went up several feet inside the trunk of the tree. So just be mindful of that. This was a tulip poplar tree. I don't know if you can see, but these little white areas is sunlight coming from the other side of the tree. So this is a very, very large defect on this tree. So either a limb broke or maybe a lightning strike. I'm not exactly sure what happened to this spot, but this is an area of complete decay that goes all the way through the trunk of the tree. This is another example of that co-dominant branching that I talked about earlier. So these two stems on this eastern white pine, this was right before one of our hurricanes, and it was actually pulling apart in the wind. I went out there because someone called us, and I was watching these two trunks physically separate and come back together during the wind. So a little bit scary to actually see that happening. So definitely things to be on the lookout for trees in your yard. Other things to be mindful of. So with your mature trees, we do have a disease called hypoxylon canker. And this particular disease affects different species of hardwoods. A lot of times the fungus is actually living underneath the bark of the tree on a lot of these trees, but as long as the tree is healthy and growing, the fungus isn't able to grow. But when they get stressed by drought, by damage, by root disease, or any kind of like changes in the grade, that fungus can start to grow, and then it takes over the tree. So in kind of the pathology world, we see this as like a secondary issue. The tree has stress. Something is stressing it out. It's not growing as well as it should, and this fungus is just taking advantage of that situation. But it does, that tree will start going downhill very, very fast. So what you want to look for is patches where bark has popped off. Okay, so this area right here, the bark is popped off of that tree. Sometimes it might be like a silver color. Sometimes it might be like a fawn kind of color, or it could be black like tar. So, that's just something to be on the lookout for. Another thing, especially this time of year in the wintertime, look out for any mushrooms that are growing right against the base of the tree. There's a lot of really good mushrooms that grow out that decompose dead roots and dead material inside the soil, and they're beneficial. They're doing what they should do. They're breaking things down for us. But there are some that can get into healthy tissue, and that will affect trees. So not all mushrooms are bad. There are actually some mushrooms that are mycorrhizal. So they actually work in symbiotic relationship with a lot of trees and will help get nutrients to the tree. And so there are some really good mushrooms out there, but there are some that can have a negative impact on trees. In Charlotte, around old willow oaks, this one right here is really common. It's called Innonotus root rot, or weeping polypore, I think is another name for it. Sometimes it'll have like these little droplets of amber-like liquid on them. Definitely be aware of that. This is a root rot disease, so definitely can cause problems for trees. When it's not actively growing, so like in the summertime, it kind of, to me, looks like cracked asphalt, so it can be kind of blackish in color. But definitely keep an eye on that if you see that at the base of the tree. What it does is it rots the roots, and it makes them more prone to being thrown by the wind. So it breaks down that structural root right there. Sometimes we'll see several different fungi around the base of a tree. This was a tree down in Charleston, Folly Beach, South Carolina. It has a root rotting fungus on it. And sometimes what will happen with these root rot disease trees is you'll see the tops will die. So the edges of the branches and the very tops will start to die back because the tree can't really move those nutrients and water very well. This is just some of the mushrooms. It's called Ganoderma. It's shiny on the top and kind of creamy white on the bottom. And so it'll start causing that tree to die. This was out at my office right here. This was a honey locust tree. It had Ganoderma root rot all over it. What we did was we got rid of all the dirt around the tree so we could look and see what the root system looked like. This was just me kind of being a little nerdy, trying to figure out what was happening. I knew this tree was dying. It was in decline. We'd actually cut off most of the tree at this point. I just wanted to look at the root system myself. So my kind coworkers were nice enough to do this and help me out. But what I found is those roots were completely rotted, but that tree was putting new roots out, trying to live. So here's my diseased root from that Ganoderma root rot. And here's that new root that's trying to grow. So the disease root went all the way up, and this is where the healthy tissue is. So it was trying to put new roots out there. Once we have root rot in a tree, you can't cure it. You can't remove the mushroom and expect the fungus to go away because the mushroom's growing inside of the woody tissue. So even just taking that mushroom off, that mushroom is just the reproductive structure to get new spores out to let the mushroom grow more. You need to look at the overall health of the tree. You might need to, cut any dead wood out or reduce the canopy to make it smaller. Sometimes it's too far gone and the tree may have to be removed and replaced. But getting an arborist to come out and look at your tree, if you suspect any root rot issues or see any kind of big red flags on your tree, definitely have an arborist come out to look at that tree and make an evaluation. I'm going to skip over this. Well, I'll go kind of quickly, but be careful with weed and feed products. 2,4-D, MCPP, and diclot, or dicamba rather, can all be taken up by roots of trees and shrubs. So be mindful, read labels for these weed and feed kind of products. 2,4-D is not a good one to put around your tree. MCPP is another one, and dicamba. So those are the ones to definitely be on the lookout for. You definitely do not want to use those around your trees and shrubs. So just kind of be careful with that. So I'll wrap it up. I'm a talker. I'm sorry. I hope it's been helpful though. But some of the things for you to think of long term, when you're looking at planting a tree, look at your species selection, make sure you're planting it properly, removing that ball and burlap, getting rid of girdling roots. Find that root flare, try to put that right at the grade level. Don't buy damaged plants, long the short of it. Water your plants properly, mulch them. Some people really like to use fertilizers. Most of our native soils, we might not need a whole lot for trees and shrubs. Get a soil test. During the wintertime, you can get that through the Mecklenburg County Extension, or if you're in another county, your local extension office. If it's not during like grass planting season, they'll get it done pretty quickly, and it's pretty inexpensive as well to figure out if you need to add anything. Avoid damage to your trees, remove your dead, diseased, dying branches, and look at your trees. Look for those red flags, look for different issues with them if they have hollows or spots, and have a certified arborist come out and look at your tree for you and make those recommendations. This is my email address and my cell phone number. I love pictures. If you want to send me pictures, I love pictures. I just love talking about trees and bugs and stuff too. So this picture right here, the found in firewood, this is if anyone camps or goes different places, please do not take firewood with you from Charlotte or from where you've been back to Charlotte. Lots of insects and diseases are moved around: emerald ash borer, thousand canker disease, laurel wilt disease that affects red bay on the coast. Very common to be able to move things. So please keep your firewood at home, buy local, burn local, all the good stuff out there. But that's it. I'll stop talking now.
Laurie, thank you so much. That has been so informative, and we do have a lot of questions. But before we get to that, just a couple of messages from our chapter. We encourage all of you to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, ask questions there. We have a very engaged community of people and plant nerds that like to talk about all these kinds of things. So please ask questions there, and we'll try to get back to you on those. As I said, we do plan to post this recording on our YouTube channel, and we also encourage you to check out the NC Wildflower website for the State Native Plant Society. There is so much good information there Jean and her team have done a great job of really providing a lot of information to our community. So that's also another great way to find information. Amy put, if you're still in the tree planning stage of what tree you think is making choices, Amy put Dr. Melachamp's 2 books in the beginning of our chat, but she might want to put that link up at the end of our chat because they are still available for purchase and order from UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens. So we are grateful to them for offering those books to everyone who's here today. And I just can't, before we get to questions, I promise we will ask Laurie some more questions, but really, really thank you to Amy and the staff at the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens for co-hosting with us today. And once it stops raining, if it ever stops raining, I encourage you to go visit the gardens. They're just beautiful, and it's so great to see a lot of the trees that we talk about and the plants that we talk about. They have them showcased and labeled. So, just a wonderful opportunity here in Charlotte. So the first question I want to ask you, Laurie, is to talk about emerald ash borer. And some of us are have contacted arborists, and they are either telling us to treat them with something for a great deal of money,
Yep.
or remove the tree for even more money. And so what should we know? And also, when you talk about getting arborist chips, should we worry about the fact that we might be spreading emerald ash borer with those chips?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So as far as the arborist chips go, so they go through a pretty good grinder and they get pretty small. So any kind of insects or diseases that may be inside that tree are going to dry out so much that they're not going to be able to move around. So emerald ash borer, while it's not a gigantic insect, it's several millimeters, it's going to get chipped up. And the same thing with the larva, it's going to be impacted. And then the same thing with the diseases, that those fungus, they need, nutrients, and they need water, they need a moisture level inside there. Once you start getting those chips and they get spread out, they dry out too fast. So we're not going to spread diseases, and we're not going to spread insects inside of wood chips. That's the good thing. So, and most of the time, the wood chips you're getting are going to be local. So, even within the city of Charlotte. So, if an arborist is working down in Steel Creek, they're not going to drive way up to University to drop a load of chips. That's just not economical unless their shop just happens to be up there. They're usually going to do it pretty local. So the few chips that I've gotten dropped at my house have been, within a 2 to 3 mile radius of where I live. So, and I was not worried. One of them, I was so fortunate, I got some cedar in there. Oh, it smelled so good for a couple of weeks at my house. It was amazing. But yeah, so don't worry about spreading insects or diseases with those wood chips. That's even the pathologists that I've spoken to, they just said they get so small chipped up and they get spread out. Now, that being said, you probably will see slime mold growing on top of your wood chips. We call it dog vomit fungus or scrambled egg fungus. You've probably seen that around your wood chips. It's nothing to worry about. It just grows on the top, and it gets pretty big. And if you spray it with water, it kind of like floofs up, and spores kind of go different places. But it's not hurting anything. Even if it gets on the trunk of your tree, or it's not going to hurt your plants. So it's just kind of living there. The only other thing that I have seen in arborist chips is, I think a common name is arterial fungus. And so they'll grow up, and sometimes the spores kind of get shot out, and you might see like little black droplets like on a car, or if you have like a play set, you might see it on that as well. But generally, it's not going to hurt anything to see that kind of stuff. You might get stinkhorn fungus growing inside there as well. That's another thing I see a lot in arborist chips. But it's not going to, it just smells bad. It's not going to hurt anything. Emerald ash borer. Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
No,
okay. Emerald. Yeah. Yep. So emerald ash borer has been in Charlotte. The first time that it was reported was 2017, and we've seen it several different places throughout the city. So the economics, so Purdue has a really cool economic calculator about treating your trees and removal. And so they found that even treating your trees for 10 plus years is less expensive than removing your tree. And you're losing all those ecological benefits as well of keeping those trees. That being said, if you have an ash tree that's under 8 inches in diameter, it might be smart to remove and replace. A tree that's 8 inches in diameter, replacing it with a 3-inch diameter tree, it's not that much loss of canopy, if that makes sense. But my only large diameter hardwood tree in my backyard is an ash tree. This will be my 3rd time treating it this year. It is my baby tree. I love this tree. And it can be a little expensive. It can, $10 to $12 per inch diameter is kind of the things that I've seen for treatment. But you only have to treat it if you inject it with emamectin benzoate is the active ingredient. Triage is one of the common names for it. So if you do a trunk injection, you only have to do that every 2 to 3 years for that tree. If you do imidacloprid, so bare tree and shrub that you can buy at the store, if you do a drench around the tree, you have to do that annually. They've seen good efficacy with both of those products. There's another one called I cannot think of the name right now, but anyway, there's a 3rd product that's derived from neem oil that can also be injected into the trunk of the tree as well, and that's going to be every 2 to hold on, I'm still talking. Sorry, my son just walked in. Every 2 to 3 years as well. So come on back. Just give me a minute, okay? Okay. This is my son Thomas.
Yay!
So there are some treatments. So for me, like I said, that ash tree is my only shade tree in my backyard. So I'm going to do everything. I told my husband, my birthday's at the end of March. That is my birthday present to me, is we're going to treat my ash tree every 2 to 3 years. And, he's on board because that's all we have. And so you do need to think about how far gone or how much impact that tree has. So, so if a tree is more than half of it is impacted, either with emerald ash borer or another reason, it may not be a candidate to be able to take up that chemical and move it sufficiently to protect the tree. Usually what we say, you have to have less than 30% of canopy loss. Okay, so at least 70% of your canopy is intact, and the more the better. If you haven't found emerald ash borer in your tree, you can proactively treat your tree. So if emerald ash borer does come to my tree, if they lay eggs inside there, that chemical is there, it's going to have an impact on any of the baby beetles that are trying to eat my tree. So I'm proactively protecting my tree. My tree has not been attacked yet to date. So for me, when I think about all the great things that the tree provides, the canopy benefits, the ecological benefits, for me, it's shading my house. Treating my tree is more important and economical for me. So I think I saw real quick in the chat, someone posted about their ash tree. It was 30 inches diameter. They got a bill or estimate for $6,000 for removal. That's not unheard of, that size of the tree, and depending on where it is in relation to the house as well, how hard of a removal it is, if they have to have a crane, a lot goes into it. But if you got one quote from a company for treatment, you can call other companies. There's more than one company in the city of Charlotte that does treatment. Bartlett, Davy, Heartwood, I know those 3 definitely do treatment. I can't think, those are the 3 I can think of off the top of my head. ArborGuard might do it as well, but I'm not positive about that. But definitely call around to get price, but kind of, I hope that answered your question.
Okay, the next question, if you don't mind, another one
No.
or two, has to do with adding a growth stimulator
Okay.
or aerating or cultivating around roots.
Okay, yeah. So so if you're aerating around your root because there's compaction, that you're worried that your soil is compacted or there was work around it, there's lots of companies that will do that. We use a tool called an air spade, and basically it's just a high power air that comes out to the example that I showed you when I was talking about Ganoderma, that my coworkers, they removed all the soil. I was trying to look at the root structure. You can actually put that air spade into the soil and kind of just like fracture the soil and to break it up and to kind of decompact it that way. You can also do some vertical mulching is what we call it. So, you kind of air spade that soil, you incorporate mulch into the soil or biochar or other, nutrient into that soil area. So you're decompacting it and you're adding that in there. That is an option as well. But like I said, most of the time, our trees, especially if it's like in a backyard that's been a backyard area that hasn't been impacted with construction or, a whole lot of cultivation or compaction happening there, generally those soils are kind of taking care of themselves. That's partly why I love mulch is it naturally breaks down and put those nutrients back into that soil. If you're in a new build kind of environment where, it's a new house, they've done a lot of compaction, they've been across the surface and they put the one tree in the front yard, they have probably taken off all that good organic horizon on that soil and left kind of our hard clay-like soil. You may need to do a little bit of work in that soil to get it kind of broken up before you put that tree inside there. But again, taking a soil sample, several different areas, mix it up in the bag, get your nutrient analysis to see if you need to do anything for that soil will be really important to figure out if you need to do anything. One of the concerns I have with like grass being really close to trees is I'm not a big fan of grass, but people love grass and they like it to be nice and green. So they use a lot of fertilizer. That can be stressful for the trees. Usually the grass is going to take up most of the fertilizer because the roots are a lot closer to the surface than those tree roots are. But too much fertilizer, while it might green up your tree, I always like to think about having that root and shoot ratio good. If your top is too big and too heavy and your roots can't structurally support it, that can be a problem with new trees. But also long-term for trees, if you have a tree that's under a little bit of stress, if you put a lot of fertilizer out there, it's going to grow a lot of leaves and that tree is now going to have to supply more water coming up from the soil, where if the root structure isn't sound enough to get enough water, that tree is going to pull more than what it can supply, which is going to stress that tree out. So think about it that way too.
So we'll just do a couple more questions, and I do promise we'll try to reach out to Laurie and get the answers to the rest of them and add them to our presentation when we put it on YouTube. But talk about if you have if you're planting a new tree and maybe in a yard that was grass or the soil is compacted, and what are there other steps other than digging the hole that's 3 times the size of the tree container? What else do you recommend or to improve the quality of the tree?
Yeah, sure. So we do not recommend adding like a lot of additives to that hole that you're putting it in. So you don't need to add any kind of like mushroom compost or anything like that. You really want to get that tree to get out into that native soil as quickly as possible. If you put a lot of good stuff in that rooting hole, when the tree kind of gets that interface of all the compost and the good high organic matter you put inside there and then goes to our native soil, it's a big kind of not shock, but it's harder for it to get there, and it may not want to grow out into that native soil. It's going to stay where all those good nutrients are. So trying to keep get that native soil, try to get that tree in there. And that was another reason why I talked about making sure you get the right tree for our soils. You don't want to get a tree that's adapted to sandy soil that needs to be well drained and stick it in our clay that just holds water for a long period of time. That's going to have an impact on there. So think about that as well. When you do dig the hole, because we can get kind of clay soil, if it gets glazed, if it starts getting really slick in the hole from your shovel, take your shovel kind of sideways and break that apart. So you're not creating a pot in your soil, if that makes any sense. So sometimes what we see when trees are augured, it goes around and around in a circle and kind of glazes the side of the clay soil. So you do kind of want to break that up to make sure that that is going to be a good environment for that tree roots to get out in. And when we do plant trees, kind of the common thing is that it takes maybe a year or two, depending on the diameter, depending on the size of that tree, for those roots to start growing and getting acclimated to the space. So the first year the trees are sleeping, the next year they creep, and the third year they leap. So they sleep, they kind of sit there and they don't grow a whole lot that first year. It's mostly underground activity. The next year they're kind of slowly putting on a little more growth. And that third year, they're going to kind of jump up and go. So don't be surprised if you put a tree in and after a year, it's kind of not growing a whole lot. It's underground. You're just not seeing that it is actually growing and getting used to its planting area.
That makes sense. So,
Yeah.
So one more question.
Sure.
Someone asked about, they had a 30-foot crepe myrtle and they were wondering if it was possible to prune it back for whatever reasons, to around 6 feet in size. So is that too aggressive for
Jesus.
Pruning?
So I would recommend what I call a basal prune, which is at ground level. No, I'm just kidding. So if that tree is really, really tall and it's just either at a scale for the house or it's too close to the house, or I'm not sure the reason why they want to support and get it back to 6 feet. We call it reduction pruning, that you can kind of slowly make proper cuts back, but not just to 6 feet high. Like I talked about, that's kind of like a form of topping. It's very aggressive topping. Crepe myrtles are hard to kill. I'm going to let you know that it's really hard to kill in a good way and in a bad way, but it probably won't flat kill it. But if I were them, I would, if it's too big or if it's just got a lot of dead limbs that they need to bring it back, they could many years slowly reduce it back, but 30 feet to 6 feet is just not practical. It would be better to cut that tree down and put something of a proper size. They love crepe myrtles, they come from 3 feet tall to 40 feet tall. So there's every color, every size in between. So.
Sounds good. Well, yeah. Laurie, thank you so much for your time today. We've got your email and we'll follow up with you on some of these other questions. Everyone who has joined us today, we are so appreciative of your time and your questions and your participation. And I forgot to mention that we do have a Zoom meeting planned for March. We've asked Laura Domingo of Reedy Creek Nature Center to tell us about wonderful places within the region where we can go see spring ephemerals. We probably will still not feel safe doing group hikes, but we're going to let you know some great places and some beautiful photographs so you can go out and find spring ephemerals on your own. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to meeting you in person soon. So thank you so much.